When we usually talk about leadership, I feel like the image that almost universally springs to mind is the pioneer.
Oh, sure, yeah. The visionary.
Right, the revolutionary. It's like this
Yeah.
lone genius standing in front of a totally blank canvas, ready to just completely dismantle the old way of doing things.
Right. They want to build an empire entirely from scratch.
Exactly. We have this profound, almost mythological romanticization of the blank slate. But, what happens when the slate isn't blank?
That's the real question.
Because what happens when you aren't handed a revolution, but instead you are handed the keys to this massive, intricate, centuries-old botanical garden?
Wow, that's a really great way to look at it.
Yeah, you didn't plant the ancient oaks. You didn't design the delicate, subterranean irrigation systems that kept the rare orchids alive through decades of drought.
Right, you're just the new head botanist.
Exactly. You just step into a living, breathing ecosystem where every single element relies on a pre-existing, finely tuned order.
And that is a phenomenal way to frame the paradigm because it immediately shifts the psychological burden,
Right.
Like when you are the pioneer with the blank canvas, your only real accountability is to your own vision.
Which is pretty freeing, honestly.
Completely.
Yeah.
If you fail, the only thing that dies is your idea. But when you step into that ancient botanical garden, your accountability is to the survival of a structure that, well, it precedes you.
Right, and theoretically, it should outlast you too.
Exactly. It is a completely different psychological and moral landscape. You aren't building a system. The system is shaping you.
Yes.
And that friction, the tension between your individual authority as the leader and your obligation to structural preservation, it's arguably the most complex dynamic any human being can navigate.
Because you are inheriting a legacy. And, okay, let's unpack this. Because chapter 24 of Morals and Dogma argues that if you don't understand the rigorous, almost terrifying rules of that legacy, you will inevitably destroy it.
Oh, without a doubt.
So today, we are immersing ourselves in a deep dive into the philosophy of leadership, responsibility, and stewardship as it's outlined in the degree of the Prince of the Tabernacle.
It's such a rich text.
It really is. But before we plunge into the mechanics of how this type of leadership actually functions, we have to address that title.
The Prince of the Tabernacle.
Right. It sounds incredibly grandiose. For anyone listening who isn't steeped in ancient Near Eastern history or esoteric symbolism, what exactly is a tabernacle?
Yeah, that's a fair question.
Why does this specific structure matter so much to the whole concept of leadership?
Well, it is the foundational metaphor for everything we're going to discuss today. Historically, the tabernacle was the portable, earthly dwelling place of the divine for the Israelites.
During their wandering in the wilderness, right?
Exactly. It wasn't a permanent stone temple like the one they later built in Jerusalem. It was this massive, highly complex, rigidly ordered tent structure.
A tent, but a really intense one.
Very intense. It had to be assembled, protected, dismantled, and moved across hostile terrain, over and over again.
Wow.
And the construction of it wasn't arbitrary at all. Every single peg, every woven curtain, every altar, it was all dictated by a specific sacred blueprint.
So it's basically the literal embodiment of order amidst the chaos of the desert.
Precisely. The wilderness is chaotic, it's dangerous, it's formless. The tabernacle was the absolute center of the camp. It represented structure, law, and divine purpose.
Okay, so then to be the prince of the tabernacle.
Right. It's not to be a king sitting on a stationary throne in some fortified castle. It means you are the guardian of order in a hostile environment.
You're constantly under threat.
Yeah. You are tasked with maintaining a highly complex system that is just, constantly under threat from the elements from internal strife, wear, and tear.
So the tabernacle is a sacred structure.
Yes. And we should define sacred here, not strictly in a theological sense, but in the sense of something imbued with deep collective meaning.
It has fundamental load-bearing importance to a society or an organization.
Exactly. It holds everything together.
Okay, let's unpack this a little more. Because if the tabernacle represents this sacred inherited structure, then the prince is the one who has to lead within its boundaries.
Right.
And honestly, this feels like a direct assault on the modern ethos of leadership.
Oh, 100%. It flies right in the face of it.
Because today, the rallying cry is always disruption,
Always. Move fast and break things.
Right. The hero is the visionary who ignores established protocols, burns the old bureaucracy to the ground, and just builds something leaner and faster in the ashes. We are so obsessed with the disruptor.
We really are. And what's fascinating here is that it's a very dangerous obsession when you apply it universally.
Yeah.
The text of Morals and Dogma, it issues this profound counter-argument to the whole cult of disruption. It basically asserts that breaking things is actually quite easy.
I mean, any fool with a sledgehammer can knock down a wall.
Exactly. But preserving something of immense value, maintaining the integrity of a sacred structure, while also navigating a changing world that requires a level of genius and discipline that disruption simply does not.
Right, because you have to understand it first.
The prince must possess a bone-deep understanding of the structure they are overseeing before they even think about altering it.
It's basically the architectural equivalent of Chesterton's fence.
Yes, exactly.
Like, you don't tear down a fence until you understand why it was put up in the first place.
Right, you can't just remove things blindly.
Let's say you've been hired to renovate a massive 14th century cathedral. You can't just walk in and say, I want an open concept floor plan. Let's take out those massive stone pillars in the center.
Oh, that would be a disaster.
Total disaster. If you swing that hammer without understanding the medieval engineering, without understanding how the weight of the massive vaulted ceiling is distributed down those specific pillars, the entire roof just comes crashing down on your head.
Yeah, you have to understand why the structure was built that way and what the original architects were actually trying to achieve.
And I feel like that requires a subjugation of the ego that most modern leaders find incredibly unpalatable.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The architect in your cathedral analogy has to submit their personal aesthetic desires to the physical reality of the building.
They can't just make it about them.
No. The text insists that the prince must respect the existing purpose rather than overriding it with their own personal whims.
Right.
When you lead a sacred structure, your job is to serve a mission that is already greater than you. The boundaries of the tabernacle aren't there to, restrict the prince's creativity.
Yeah, in a cage.
No.
Yeah.
They're the very channels that give the leader's actions any meaning at all.
Okay, but wait, I want to challenge that premise for a second.
Sure.
Doesn't that sound incredibly stifling? Like, if I'm listening to this deep dive right now and say, I've just taken over a massive multi-generational family business, or maybe I've been elected to head a historic institution, and I'm told my job is just to submit to the existing boundaries. I mean, aren't we just talking about administrative babysitting at that point?
I can see why it sounds like that, yeah.
Where is the leadership in just maintaining the status quo?
It is a critical distinction, really.
Yeah.
Submitting to the purpose of the structure is not the same as submitting to the status quo of its operations.
Okay, explain that.
Well, the order of the system, the core mission, the foundational values that is what you submit to, you are not babysitting. You are guarding the central fire.
Ah, I like that.
The text makes it very clear that leadership in this context is inextricably connected to order, but it is an active, dynamic order.
Because the tabernacle wasn't static.
Right, think of the tabernacle again. It had to be moved. It had to cross rivers. It had to survive sandstorms.
So the environment was constantly shifting.
Always. Which meant the tactical execution of guarding the tabernacle constantly required brilliant, adaptive leadership. But the blueprint of the tabernacle, its fundamental identity that remained untouched.
So it's not really about being constrained, it's about being focused.
Exactly.
You aren't boxed in. You are given a specific theater of operations where your actions have maximum impact.
Yes, very well put.
But, that impact isn't free. If a leader must respect the structure, and if their authority is derived purely from their role as its guardian, then their authority cannot be absolute.
It definitely cannot.
It has to be tied directly to the weight of their obligations, which leads us to, the terrifying reality of the crown itself, the relationship between authority and responsibility.
And this is where the esoteric rigor of this 19th century philosophy really separates itself from modern management theory.
Oh, big time.
The text states, without any ambiguity, that authority is not a privilege. It is not a reward for a lifetime of hard work.
It's not a gold watch.
No. It is not a spoils of war victory, and it is certainly not a license to just bend the world to your will.
Right.
Authority comes inextricably linked with a crushing level of responsibility. The prince is fundamentally accountable for making thoughtful decisions, acting with unyielding integrity. And this is the element that breaks most leaders, I think, always considering the long-term impact of their choices.
The long-term impact, yeah. That phrase is so easy to say, but almost impossible to truly internalize.
It really is.
We are so conditioned by the immediate, the 24-hour news cycle, the immediate dopamine hit of social media approval, the demands of the current fiscal year.
Everything is short-term now.
But the Prince of the Tabernacle is tasked with thinking in decades, perhaps centuries. I mean, they are planting seeds for shade they will never sit in, to use that old Greek proverb.
Let's extrapolate on the psychological weight of that for a minute. Imagine the profound, isolating mental burden of knowing that a choice you make today might not show its true devastating consequences until long after you are dead.
That's terrifying.
It is. A true prince cannot make decisions optimized for short-term gain. They cannot govern based on immediate popularity or, the applause of the crowd in the courtyard.
Right.
They are fundamentally accountable to the future of the structure.
Which means they will inevitably have to make decisions that make them incredibly unpopular in the present.
Exactly. They have to possess the psychological fortitude to be hated today in order to prevent structural decay tomorrow.
Yeah.
If you see a hairline fracture in the foundation of an institution, the necessary repair might require halting all operations, slashing budgets, causing immense immediate pain.
And people will hate that.
The crowd will demand you keep the party going. They will call you a tyrant for stopping the music.
Uh-huh.
But if you give in to the crowd, the building collapses in 20 years.
Wow. It makes me think about how many historical dynasties or even massive modern conglomerates have crumbled simply because the heir to the throne wanted the authority without the crushing duty.
Oh, we see this archetypal tragedy all the time.
The founder builds the empire through immense sacrifice. Then the second or third generation inherits the title. They get the shiny crown, the absolute authority to tell others what to do.
Right. They love the perks.
But the moment the structural integrity of the organization is threatened, the moment a deeply agonizing, unpopular decision has to be made, they experience paralysis.
Oh, freeze.
Yeah. They want the power, but they refuse the tether of responsibility.
Because responsibility is the balancing force of authority.
Mm-hmm.
Think of authority as the sail of a massive galleon.
Okay.
It's the power to catch the wind, to move forward, to cut through the water with terrifying speed.
Right.
But responsibility is the heavy lead ballast, deep in the hull of the ship. It's completely unseen by the crew on deck.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If you build a ship with a massive sail, immense authority, but you strip out the heavy ballast of responsibility because, it slows you down, what happens?
The moment a crosswind hits, the ship capsizes and everyone drowns.
Precisely. The authority has to be balanced by an equal weight of accountability. The prince must embrace the heavy, unglamorous ballast, ensuring that the momentum generated by their authority doesn't fracture the sacred structure they are meant to navigate.
Man, that's powerful. But if the leader is carrying all that ballast, that heavy accountability to the future, what exactly are they stabilizing in the present?
That's the vital question.
Right, because what happens to the system if they fail to hold that weight? The source text makes a very specific, fascinating claim here. It argues that disorder fundamentally weakens purpose.
Yes, it does.
It treats the preservation of order not just as a housekeeping task, but as a vital existential necessity.
It does, because the mandate of the prince is to protect these systems, maintain stability, and ensure continuity. And to understand why disorder destroys purpose, we really have to look at how human systems expend energy.
Okay, how so?
Well, every organization, every society, every ancient order has a finite amount of collective energy. When a system is orderly, when the laws are understood, when the boundaries of behavior are clear, when justice is reliable, the internal friction of the system is practically zero.
And because there's no internal friction, all that collective energy can be directed outward, toward the mission, toward the sacred purpose.
Exactly. But when a system descends into chaos, when the leader fails to enforce the boundaries, when rules are applied arbitrarily, when the structure begins to rot, what happens to that finite energy?
It turns inward. It becomes cannibalistic. Like, if I don't know if the rules apply to me or if I have to constantly watch my back because the structure is unstable, I'm no longer working toward the purpose. I'm just trying to survive the environment.
Yes.
I'm engaging in petty politics. I'm hoarding resources. I'm fighting turf wars just to secure my own little patch of ground.
You are consumed by entropy. The purpose becomes a ghost. The actual mission of the tabernacle, to house the divine, to unite the people, is completely forgotten because the immediate crisis of disorder consumes all available bandwidth.
Right.
So by violently protecting the order of the tabernacle, the prince is quite literally protecting the lifeblood of the organization's purpose. They are maintaining the vacuum in which purpose can thrive.
Let me play the skeptic here again, though, because this defense of strict order sounds incredibly rigid.
Okay, let's hear it.
History is littered with empires and institutions that collapsed specifically because they were too rigidly ordered. They became massive bureaucracies that worshipped their own rules.
Sure, yeah.
Think about the Roman Empire in its later stages, or certain ancient religious orders that just couldn't adapt to new scientific realities. If a leader's job is just to fiercely protect the existing system and maintain stability, aren't they just guaranteeing their own irrelevance? Does order inherently kill innovation?
That is the eternal trap, and it's why this degree of leadership is so incredibly rare. You are confusing order with stasis.
Oh, interesting.
The text calls for the prince to ensure continuity. Continuity is fundamentally different from freezing a system in time.
Okay, break that down for me.
Let's look at a biological structure.
Yeah.
If you want to perfectly preserve the current state of a human body, you kill it and freeze it in liquid nitrogen.
Gross, but true.
You have achieved perfect stasis, but you have destroyed the life.
Right, because true life is a constant state of controlled death and rebirth at the cellular level.
Yes. To preserve the life of the body, it must constantly consume new energy, fight off novel pathogens, adapt to changing temperatures, regenerate its cells. The body you have today does not contain the same cells you had 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's always wild to think about.
The material is completely changed. But the continuity of your identity, the order of your biological system, has been maintained. Ensuring continuity means keeping the heart of the structure beating through drastically changing circumstances.
It's the ship of Theseus paradox. Like, if you replace every plank of wood on the ship over 100 years, is it still the same ship? The philosophy here argues that yes, it is, as long as the fundamental purpose and the governing order of the ship remain intact.
Exactly. It means ensuring that the purpose survives, even if the methods must radically evolve.
Right.
If a sacred structure was built to disseminate truth, and for 300 years it did so through handwritten manuscripts, the Prince of the Tabernacle doesn't blindly protect the printing press when the digital age arrives.
Because that would be mistaking the scaffolding for the building.
Precisely. True preservation requires the profound wisdom to discern what is core to the sacred mission and what is merely a temporary, localized tool used to achieve it.
Yeah.
Stagnation is a failure of leadership, but reckless destruction of the core in the name of innovation is a failure of stewardship.
Man, that is a razor-thin line to walk. Knowing the difference between the load-bearing pillar and the temporary scaffolding.
It is the hardest job in the world.
And to walk that line, to protect a system with that kind of nuance without becoming a rigid, paranoid tyrant, the leader has to undergo a massive internal transformation.
They really do.
They have to fundamentally change how they view their position relative to the people they lead, which introduces what I think is the most jarring, counterintuitive concept in this entire chapter.
The absolute inversion of the hierarchy.
Yes. It is a radical proposition, particularly when you consider the historical context of Morals and Dogma.
Oh, absolutely.
The text asserts that true leadership is rooted entirely in serving others, not in dominance.
Right.
The prince, who holds the ultimate authority, must support the group, prioritize the collective well-being, and lead with an absolute, uncompromising humility.
Let's really dissect the friction there, because we are talking about an authoritative structure, a hierarchical system with strict rules.
Very strict.
The prince sits at the absolute apex of the tabernacle's hierarchy. They wear the crown, they hold the power of judgment, yet the philosophy demands that they act as the servant to the collective.
Which is a complete contradiction of how human biology and human history naturally tend to view power.
It is an intentional contradiction. It is the deliberate subjugation of the natural human ego.
Right.
The unrefined, primitive human instinct is to view a hierarchy as a pyramid, where all the resources, all the safety, and all the glory flow upward to the apex predator at the top.
Yeah, the thousands of people at the base of the pyramid carry the crushing weight so the king at the top can rest.
But the Prince of the Tabernacle paradigm demands that you flip the pyramid upside down.
So the leader is at the very bottom.
The leader is the absolute bottom point, bearing the accumulated terrifying weight of the entire structure. They are the foundational point.
Wow.
Their entire existence is dedicated to ensuring that the massive structure expanding above them is stable, secure, and capable of fulfilling its purpose. They do not extract value from the structure. They provide the stability, that allows the structure to exist.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this reminds me of the historical concept of the sovereign as the first servant of the state. Ah, yes. Frederick the Great popularized that idea. The absolute monarch isn't the owner of the state. He is the most heavily burdened employee of the state. His life is entirely forfeited to the operational needs of the nation.
That is the exact psychological framing required here. And, we must be careful not to confuse this with modern sanitized concepts of servant leadership
No.
that just mean, like, being polite to your employee.
Right, it's not just about buying pizza on Fridays.
No, this is a grueling, sacrificial reality. The prince absorbs the shockwaves. When there's a crisis, the prince doesn't shield themselves behind their subordinates. They step into the breach.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this kind of extreme humility acts as the only reliable safeguard against the primary pathogen that destroys sacred structures from the inside out: arrogance.
Arrogance being the belief that the structure exists to serve you.
Precisely. Arrogance leads a leader to believe that they are the purpose of the organization rather than the steward of it.
That's a huge shift.
It is. Dominance ruling by fear, extracting wealth or prestige from your subordinates, insulating yourself from consequence. It inevitably fractures groups. It creates deep resentment. It incentivizes hidden agendas. And ultimately, it breeds the very disorder we established is fatal to the purpose.
Right.
Service, on the other hand, acts as a structural adhesive. When a collective knows, through repeated, undeniable demonstration, that the prince will sacrifice their own comfort, their own reputation, and their own safety to protect the mission and the people, it breeds a level of cohesion and institutional integrity that no amount of authoritarian terror could ever forge.
It's the difference between an empire held together by the threat of the sword, which shatters the moment the sovereign shows weakness, and an order held together by its shared devotion to a leader who suffers for them.
Exactly.
But, and I think this is a crucial caveat, being a humble servant at the bottom of the inverted pyramid does not mean being weak.
Not at all.
A servant leader still holds absolute power. They still have to enforce the boundaries, they still have to cut out the rot, and they must perfectly calibrate that immense power with their crushing duty.
Yes.
How does the text actually define the failure to maintain that balance?
The source material provides a stark, almost mathematical equation for leadership failure. It maps out two disastrous extremes.
Okay, what are they?
Failure state number 1. Power without duty inevitably leads to corruption.
Yikes.
Failure state number 2. Duty without power inevitably leads to inefficiency and paralysis.
Double yikes.
The true prince must hold the absolute center, using authority forcefully but responsibly while acting with purposeful duty.
I want to spend significant time analyzing these two failure states because they represent the two most common tragedies in human organization. Let's start with the first one, power without duty, authority untethered from service.
Right.
How specifically does that transition into corruption? Because, nobody wakes up and decides to be a corrupt tyrant. How does the mechanism actually work?
It operates through the slow, insidious creep of self-interest and rationalization. Duty, as we've defined it, is the tether that binds the leader's power to the greater good of the sacred structure.
Right.
It is the constant nagging reminder of why the power was granted in the first place. But if a leader loses their reverence for the structure, if they stop believing in the sacredness of the tabernacle, that tether is severed.
And the power just runs wild.
Well, here is the critical part. The power doesn't disappear just because the duty is gone. The massive engine is still running. It just lacks a compass.
And human nature, being what it is, a massive engine without a compass will naturally steer towards self-preservation.
Always. If a leader has immense authority, the ability to allocate vast resources, the power to exile rivals, the capacity to rewrite the rules, but feels no deep agonizing obligation to the historic purpose of the institution, they will naturally begin using that power to insulate themselves from discomfort. They will surround themselves with sycophants who tell them they are infallible. They will use the institution's resources to build a fortress for their own ego.
They basically start bulldozing the ancient botanical garden to build themselves a private swimming pool.
Exactly.
And they will rationalize it by saying, I deserve this, I carry the burden of the crown.
That is the true mechanism of corruption right there. It is rarely a dramatic, cinematic betrayal. It is 1,000 micro decisions where the leader chooses their own convenience over the structural integrity of the legacy they inherited.
It's death by 1,000 cuts.
Yes. It is the hollowing out of a legacy institution until it is nothing more than a life support system for the leader's ego.
That is chilling.
It is.
Now let's pivot to the opposite extreme, which might be even more tragic on a personal level. Duty without power.
Oh, this one is tough.
What happens to the human being who is overflowing with a profound sense of obligation to the sacred structure, who understands the mission perfectly, but lacks the structural authority to enact any change?
This is the recipe for the Cassandra complex. It is a state of profound psychological torture and organizational paralysis.
Explain that a bit more.
Think of the individual, perhaps deep within the ranks of a sprawling legacy institution, who deeply, passionately cares about the collective well-being. They possess the historical knowledge, they see the hairline fractures in the foundation, they have entirely internalized the duty of the prince.
But structurally, they are denied the power.
Exactly. They cannot allocate the funds to fix the foundation. They cannot remove the corrupt actors above them. They are forced to watch the structure decay while holding the blueprint for its salvation in their hands.
Oh man, I can imagine the profound burnout that causes. And I want you, the listener, to really internalize this for a second. Have you ever been trapped in that exact role?
It's so common.
Have you ever been in a position where you were held emotionally or practically responsible for an outcome, like you carried the full crushing weight of the duty, but you were given absolutely none of the structural authority to fix the root systemic problems?
It's agonizing.
You are basically just ordered to bail water out of a sinking ship with a teaspoon while the captain drills holes in the hull.
It destroys the human spirit. The person with immense duty but zero power eventually faces a terrible choice. They either abandon the structure entirely in order to save their own sanity.
Which means the institution loses its most devoted, pure-hearted guardians.
Exactly. Or they remain and become profoundly cynical, realizing their efforts are a tragic farce. This is why the prince's role at the center of the equation is so delicate and so vital.
So the prince must calibrate this constantly. They have to possess the necessary terrifying power to actually protect the structure, but their sense of duty must be so profound that they only ever unleash that power in absolute service of the purpose.
Yes.
How does a leader actually audit themselves, though? How do you know you aren't just rationalizing a power grab by calling it duty?
The mechanism of calibration is structural alignment. A true prince must constantly submit their decisions to a brutal internal audit.
Like what?
They have to ask themselves, does this action increase my personal comfort? Or does it reinforce the foundational pillars of the tabernacle? Am I removing this obstacle because it threatens the mission or because it offends my pride?
Wow.
It requires a level of brutal, objective self-awareness that is incredibly exhausting to maintain.
And it's not a destination you reach. You don't just achieve perfect equilibrium one afternoon and coast for the rest of your tenure.
Definitely not.
It requires continuous active maintenance, which actually bridges us perfectly to the reality of the work itself, the active, grueling nature of maintaining stability.
The philosophy here dismantles a very pervasive, comforting illusion about the nature of order.
Okay.
We inherently tend to conceptualize stability as a state of rest. We picture a calm, glass-like ocean. We picture a stone monument standing silently in a field.
Right, like it's just sitting there.
But the text argues that in human systems, stability is never static. Entropy is the natural state of the universe. Left to its own devices, every structure decays. Therefore, stability is an illusion created by immense, continuous, unseen effort. The prince must actively prevent chaos and continually reinforce the structure.
I love dismantling the idea of stability as rest. It's so fundamentally false. When we were discussing this earlier, you brought up a physical analogy that I think perfectly illustrates the deception of stability. The physics of a bicycle.
Yes. The bicycle is the perfect mechanical representation of active equilibrium.
Oh, for sure.
If you stand on a sidewalk and watch a cyclist glide perfectly smoothly down a path, it looks effortless. It looks static from a distance. The bicycle appears to just be stable.
Yeah, they're just cruising.
But what is actually happening at the level of the rider? The rider is locked in a state of constant, exhausting engagement.
They are continuously pedaling to maintain the forward momentum required to defeat gravity.
Yes. Their core muscles are constantly firing to balance the shifting weight. Their hands are making thousands of invisible micro-adjustments to the handlebars to account for a pebble, a gust of wind, or a slight slope in the pavement.
And the second the rider stops making that active, continuous effort, the second they decide to just relax and be static, the bicycle immediately loses its equilibrium and violently crashes to the ground.
Exactly. Stability is a verb, not a noun.
So good.
In the context of leading a sacred structure, what does that active peddling look like? How do you actively prevent the chaos of the wilderness from infiltrating the tabernacle?
It looks like hypervigilance.
Yes. It means the leader is constantly, almost obsessively scanning the horizon for external threats and internal decay. It means having the agonizingly difficult conversations early before a minor misunderstanding metastasizes into a structural fracture.
Right.
It means actively, daily reinforcing the core values of the institution, not by issuing memos, but by violently embodying those values and ruthlessly holding others accountable to them.
Let me push back on this concept of constant reinforcement, though, because we established earlier that stasis is death and that adaptation is necessary for continuity. If your default mode is constantly reinforcing the existing structure, how do you differentiate between reinforcing a healthy, load-bearing pillar and stubbornly propping up a failing, rotting piece of wood? Like, how do you know when it's time to adapt?
That discernment is the highest, most difficult art of the prince. Recalling the source's explicit instruction to maintain continuity, we have to understand that true reinforcement sometimes requires acts of surgical violence against the structure itself.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's return to the massive historic cathedral we are tasked with preserving. You are doing your vigilant, continuous scanning, and deep in the crypt, you find a massive, ancient wooden support beam that is entirely consumed by dry rot from the inside out.
Well, you can't just slap a fresh coat of lacquer on it, wrap some iron bands around it, and call it reinforced. That's just cosmetic theater.
Exactly. It is the illusion of stability, which is far more dangerous than obvious instability.
Yeah.
To truly maintain the equilibrium of the entire edifice, you have to do the incredibly dangerous, highly disruptive work of adaptation. You have to temporarily brace the massive stone ceiling above it. You have to take a saw and violently cut out the rotting historical wood.
And you have to install a modern forged steel beam in its place.
Yes. The act of adaptation replacing the 14th century wood with 21st century steel was an absolute requirement to preserve the original purpose of the cathedral.
Which is to stay standing and house the divine.
Exactly. If the prince had been too sentimental to destroy the old wood, or too timid to risk the temporary chaos of the construction process, the entire tabernacle would eventually collapse.
Right.
The active work of equilibrium is this constant pulsing rhythm, scanning for decay, relentlessly reinforcing the healthy pillars, and surgically excising and adapting the rot.
And recognizing that this effort is endless, that the pedaling never stops, that the structural rot will always return in new forms, and that the work will never be finished, brings us to the final and unequivocally the most profound philosophical realization of the prince.
Yes.
The realization that this sacred structure, if they do their job correctly, will outlive them. Which brings us to the ultimate thesis of this chapter: leadership as stewardship.
This is the grand culmination of everything we've analyzed today.
It really is.
The core, transcendent revelation of morals and dogma regarding power is that the prince is not an owner. They are a steward. Leadership is a fleeting, ephemeral condition, but the impact of that leadership echoes through generations.
The mandate is not to conquer.
No. The mandate is to protect what exists, aggressively improve it where necessary, and pass on a stronger, more resilient system to the unseen generation that follows.
The word stewardship is thrown around a lot, but we need to dive into its philosophical implications because it demands the absolute annihilation of a leader's ego.
It does.
Ownership implies total dominion. Like, if I own the cathedral, it exists solely for my benefit. I can sell it, I can paint it neon green, I can burn it to the ground for the insurance money. My identity is tied to my possession of it. But a steward is someone who has been entrusted with something infinitely precious that fundamentally belongs to someone else. It belongs to the ancestors who bled to build it, and it belongs to the descendants who will desperately need it for shelter.
That psychological shift from ownership to stewardship is the death of the tyrant within.
Wow.
If you view yourself as the owner of the legacy, every critique of the structure is a personal attack on your identity. Every necessary adaptation feels like a threat to your hegemony.
Because it's yours.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But if you deeply internalize that you are a steward, you realize you are just a temporary custodian holding the keys for a microscopic fraction of time.
Yeah.
Your identity is no longer wrapped up in wearing the crown. Your values derived entirely from how meticulously you polished the crown and reinforced the walls before your time expired.
It makes me think of the mechanics of a relay race, a grueling, multi-generational marathon relay.
I love this analogy.
When you are running your specific leg of the race, you are the absolute center of the action. You are pushing your biology to the absolute limit. You are calculating your stride, managing your oxygen debt, navigating the treacherous terrain.
Right.
It requires all of your genius and all of your power, but you never, for a single delusional second, think that the baton belongs to you.
Because the baton is the sacred structure. It is the purpose.
Exactly. Your only job, your only reason for being on the track is to run your leg as violently and efficiently as you can, protect the baton from being dropped, and execute a flawless, smooth handoff to the next runner.
Right.
You don't cross the finish line of your segment and decide, hey, I ran really hard, so I'm going to take this baton home and put it on my mantle as a trophy.
Yet the tragedy of human history is defined by leaders who try to take the baton home.
Yeah, they do.
They try to cling to the power as their bodies fail. They become deeply paranoid and refuse to train a successor because they fear being overshadowed.
Right. They prioritize the cementing of their own legacy over the health of the institution.
And in doing so, they drop the baton. The relay race analogy perfectly encapsulates the esoteric truth of this chapter. True stewardship is the ultimate expression of service.
It really is.
It is the highest, most noble application of the power and duty equation. And it is the only valid reason for enduring the grueling, endless work of maintaining active stability.
Because if you don't actively keep the bicycle upright, if you don't replace the rotting wood with steel, there is no tabernacle left to hand off to the next prince.
Precisely. The Prince of the Tabernacle is a title of profound, almost sacred honor. But that honor is derived entirely from the willingness to sacrifice the self for the preservation of the system.
Yeah.
It is a philosophy that demands absolute, terrifying accountability from the leader for the sole, transcendent purpose of ensuring that order and meaning survive the chaos of time.
So after this intense exploration, what does this all mean for us? If we pull all these dense philosophical threads together, what is the core tapestry we're looking at?
Well, we've learned a lot today.
We have. We've learned that true, enduring leadership does not happen in the romanticized vacuum of a blank slate. It exists within and is bound by the very legacy it seeks to guide.
Right.
We've seen that the shiny crown of authority is practically made of lead, demanding a level of psychological fortitude and deferred gratification that most human beings actively flee from.
And we've explored the radical, ego-destroying reality that to sit at the apex of a sacred hierarchy is actually to be the foundational servant, bearing the crushing weight of the collective while prioritizing the historic purpose over any personal glory.
Yeah. We've dismantled the illusion of passive stability, realizing that maintaining our institutions, our multi-generational projects, and our societies requires the constant, grueling pedaling of a bicycle, a hyper-vigilant rhythm of reinforcing the good and surgically adapting the rot.
Exactly.
And ultimately, we learned that all leadership is a temporary, ephemeral stewardship, a fleeting moment where we are trusted to carry the baton through the dark before passing it on.
It is a demanding, rigorous, and ultimately beautiful vision of what a human being is capable of when they dedicate themselves to an order larger than their own ephemeral desires.
It really is. And it sets the stage perfectly for where our journey through this text is heading next. In our next deep dive into Morals and Dogma, we are going to step into the highly symbolic, deeply psychological realm of the Night of the Brazen Serpent.
I can't wait for that one.
It's going to be great. If today was about the rigid mechanics of order, boundaries, and the heavy structural weight of stewardship, our next exploration is going to shift radically toward the esoteric mechanisms of healing, internal transformation, and symbolic rebirth.
It's going to be a fascinating, entirely different psychological landscape.
But before we close the book on the Prince, we want to leave you with something profound to interrogate in your own life.
Yes. I want you to brutally examine the systems and structures you are a part of today. Your organization, your family dynasty, the legacy projects you oversee.
Really look at them.
In those specific spaces, are you truly acting as a steward, sacrificing your ego to serve the greater long-term purpose? Or are you, whether subtly or overtly, just using the structure to build a fortress for your own control?
That's a heavy question.
And ultimately, ask yourself the terrifying question of the Prince. How will the microscopic choices you make today affect the structural integrity of the legacy you leave behind 100 years from now?
Because whether you consciously accept the title or not, you are the architect in that historic cathedral. You are the guardian of that ancient botanical garden. The survival of the ecosystem is entirely in your hands. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we will